we're we're looking at it from two different perspectives, but as of right now, our causes align, and
Yeah, the
that's why
incentives align.
correct, the incentives align, and so you're seeing a lot of people that you would not see normally shaking hands or having a drink with or having a meal with. Their incentives align, so it's like, hey, this is what we're doing. So I
Let's
think
be friends.
correct, at least for this.
Just to be the contrarian,
Yeah.
Trump says a lot of things. Trump said $100,000 per Bitcoin, you're welcome, as if it was him. I mean, okay, so yeah,
That's
he
the
says a
ego
lot of
side.
things.
Shout out to the Orange Manufacturing Group. They helped me with my logo design, and you know that I'll be ordering their premium hardwood sign and lightning keychain. Accessories are curated from a selection of durable traditional materials built to last. Use the Geyser Fund link in the show notes to take advantage of their trust minimal process, or to save 5%, go to omg21btc.com. That's omg21btc.com and use code AAB21Q. Welcome to Ask a Bitcoiner 21 Questions. My name is Saida Gomez, and today I've invited Yves Benaim and CJ the Smart Guy to discuss the road to Bitcoin as a reserve asset in Switzerland and the US. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Very good, thank you.
Fantastic.
So, the reason I've invited you both, as you know, and for the audience, Yves Benaim is at Slock on Twitter. He's a Bitcoin OG, and he's leading the initiative here in Switzerland to add Bitcoin to the Constitution. And CJ is a CPA. Let me get all of this straight. CPA, a board member of the Bitcoin transformation community that educates incarcerated individuals on Bitcoin and helps them find jobs in the Bitcoin mining space. You are writing a book, and you're also organizing a Bitcoin marathon in
Bitcoin's birthday, January 3rd, 2026, in Richmond, Virginia.
Richmond, Virginia. That's what I was looking to remember. So you guys both have experience and exposure to this whole new world that's opening up, which is Bitcoin as a reserve asset. So thank you so much for saying yes to my invitation to come on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for organizing this.
Great. So we are starting at block height 863,514. The price of Bitcoin is back up to 99,030 American dollars. Sats per dollar is 1,010, and the market capitalization is 1.96 trillion. We're still living in like extraordinary times right now.
Sure.
To get the conversation going, I just wanted to have a brief outline or overview of the two democratic systems that we're working in. So Switzerland, I'm a Swiss citizen, actually. I became a citizen in 2020. So I'm getting used to the direct democracy that we have here, where we have frequent referenda and we vote on just about everything. Is that correct, Yves?
Yes, it's very correct. If you live in Switzerland and you hear about democracy everywhere else, everything sounds like so strange. But of course, for them, we sound strange. So, but yeah, we vote a lot in Switzerland. And what is very interesting, especially in this particular conversation, is that the people can submit a change that will need to be voted, and then it becomes part of the constitution. It becomes part of the legal system. But it comes bottom up.
From the people.
Yeah.
And the US is a constitutional republic. And so the system there is quite different in terms of how a bill becomes an act. So, CJ, can you walk us through what that process looks like?
Yeah, so I'll go through the basics because it can be more
Yes,
complicated
please.
than what I'm going to present. But basically, the House of Representatives, we vote for those. So, like individual districts throughout the country, we vote for our representatives, and then representatives then create bills. The bill then has to go to the Senate, we vote for senators on a state, like per state. Each state has two senators, whereas the reps, it's like based off of population. Senators, it's always two senators per state. Once the bill goes from the House of Representatives, then it goes to the Senate. Uh, if there's some disagreements, then it might get sent back to the House of Representatives, or it might go to like a committee where they'll figure out the differences, try to make sure it's done correctly. Then they'll redo the votes. And then after that, then it goes to the president, who the people vote on every 4 years. And if the president signs off on it, then it becomes law. If the president vetoes it, meaning it doesn't matter if the House and the Senate pass it, if the president vetoes it, then it goes back. And then I believe it's a 66% Senate. They can then override the veto if a certain amount of senators say, no, this is exactly what we're going to do. And so that's the basic of it.
I'm lost already.
Sorry, I tried to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, no worries. It's just, it's funny because people have asked me if I'm American, depending on whether my Fringlish sparks up. But I guess most people hear a North American accent and they assume that I'm American, but I am not. And I know very little about the real democratic process in the US. I just know what I see on the internet or when I used to have a TV on TV. So I just want to sort of recap the steps. So in Switzerland, Yves, you've had this idea, a few Bitcoiners have had this idea to have Bitcoin added to the Constitution. And the process is to get signatures, right?
Yes. I just want to go back to what I said earlier. In this particular conversation, the popular initiative is what I'm concerned with. But of course, we also have politicians who are elected according to people and places, and they decide things and they discuss things. And even when we do the popular initiative, it will be presented to them, and they can also come back with a counter project, for example,
Okay.
or try to make it in a way that they think the people who elected them would benefit the best. But in this particular case, the idea is normal people who have a right to vote can gather signatures, and then when we have enough signatures, we put it to be voted by, everybody.
Everyone.
And then everyone needs to agree for it to pass, of course. The fact that we get signatures is not enough.
Yeah. So it's the signatures, the vote, and then I guess politicians can veto or
No, they cannot veto. They cannot
can't
veto.
veto.
So what they can do is, they will have to do is to examine what we're presenting. They have to give their opinion, whether they suggest that it's a good idea or a bad idea. Political parties have to also come up with their own opinion. But then after that, it's still the people who decide and who votes yes or no.
So people process and then people who decide
Exactly.
vote.
Exactly.
And the US is the senator who proposes. So two senators per state. So people who vote for the senator puts this before the Senate, and then it
So
goes
we
to Congress.
we vote for, so Congress makes up the House of Representatives and Senate. We vote for the representatives. That's based off of population. They're the ones
Hmm.
who write the bills. Then the Senate has to sign off on it. If they don't, there's mediation. It goes back to a vote. Once the Senate, once it passes both sides of Congress, then it goes to the president. If the president signs, it becomes law. If the president doesn't, then it goes back to the Senate. Then the Senate has to override the veto, and then it can still become law.
Okay, so the people, the plebs, are most influential in who they vote for. That's where the
Correct.
influence from the plebs come in. Okay, I think I get it.
Correct. Correct.
So, with that being said, how are things operationalized? So, in the US, you've already touched on this, but I'd like, if possible, for you to go into further detail. So, Cynthia Loomis has introduced this bill, but the
Hmm.
title is the Bitcoin Act, but
Hmm.
it's still actually a bill to
Mhm.
Congress, what are the steps required? I think it's a 5-step process before it actually gets presented to the president for signature.
Yeah, so the House would have to agree. So right now we're going through a change of administration. So you have Democrats and Republicans, which are two different parties. Um,
Hmm.
we would have to have the majority of the House of Representatives vote for it. Once that gets approved, then it would go to the Senate. Then the majority of the senators would have to agree. Uh, then it would have to go to the president to sign off. President Trump, he is very pro Bitcoin, very pro crypto. So more than likely, he would sign it. We wouldn't have to worry about vetoes versus the last administration. We had a bill that both Democrats and Republicans signed off on. The House, Senate signed off on, and Joe Biden vetoed it. And so it created a lot of anger in the crypto community because it was like, why are you sabotaging this? Why do you hate us this much? We finally agreed on something. Democrats and Republicans agreed, and you vetoed it. And so that was one of the reasons why a lot of the crypto people wanted Biden out and wanted Trump in.
So what was the bill? Was it the same
No.
the Bitcoin Act? It was something else. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it basically came down to the SEC. They're the ones that control like securities. So Gary Gensler, he was the SEC chair. He wanted more power to be
Popular.
able to get unpopular. Yeah. He
I was being sarcastic.
yeah. Uh, he's been suing a lot of crypto companies saying that they're securities, but the securities laws were made in like 1934. And so it wasn't made for this cryptocurrency technology. And so, if anything, we just need new laws or something that's going to adjust. And the bill that everybody agreed on basically would take away some of the power from the SEC. And Joe Biden wanted Gary Gensler and the SEC to have more power. Um, versus Trump was like he's going to fire Gary Gensler on day one. And sure enough, the second that Trump got elected, Gary Gensler said, "Hey, I'm resigning on day one." Um, and so, uh, yeah, a lot of politics is going on in the states about Bitcoin for sure.
Yeah. And just for the record, because I've had a few people who aren't part of the Bitcoin space ask me why I'm interested in American politics. I'm actually not that interested in politics, period. But when it becomes like, that's not me. But when it's at the intersection of politics and Bitcoin, I become interested. And I'd like to state explicitly once again that the US holds the world reserve asset, which is the US dollar. So it is interesting for just about everyone on this planet to pay attention to what's happening. But Yves, so CJ outlined what could go wrong in the case of Biden, who vetoed a bill. What could happen in Switzerland? So let's say the signatures are gathered, the people vote, they say, yes, we want Bitcoin added to the Constitution. Can Swiss politicians step in and do something to stop this from happening, or can anyone else step in?
So once it's voted, nobody can come in. There will be I don't know how long the legal process takes to change the constitution, but then it will be added and it will be there. What can happen though is as we present it, we get all the signatures, which is the first step. We have 18 months to get 100,000 signatures. Once we get all the signatures and we bring it, and maybe we have 120,000 just to be sure, because some of them can be invalidated because the person misspelled their name or something. I have to mention everything needs to be handwritten. It's
Yeah.
actual physical handwriting on sheet of paper. But once this is fine and we actually have 100,000 signatures, this will go in front of what is it called, the parliament, and they can they the way it works with initiatives is that they will start studying the proposal, and then they can come back to us and say, look, what you're proposing is very interesting, but we were discussing about this and that. Why don't we blah, blah, blah. And then in that particular case, what happens quite often is that the initiative committee can withdraw the initiative. It doesn't mean that it wasn't successful, but there is a negotiation so that maybe it gets incorporated in something else that they had in mind, or maybe it gets incorporated in something that is more global, more generic, as opposed to like one particular change. So that happens. But this is not, again, they're not saying you have to remove it. Like in that case, the government doesn't have any say. They have to go forward, but the committee can negotiate and maybe withdraw if they want to. Then it goes to the vote. And then when it goes to the vote, of course, politicians and political parties can be very against it. And of course, they have a lot of voice, and a lot of people are voting according to their party, just like everywhere else. So they may be influenced to say, I don't understand it, but I don't like it, which happened with many initiatives in the past, because of course you want to protect the interests of your community. And if your community tells you this is bad, even if you don't really understand it, you will be voting. So in this particular case, we are not so worried about getting the signatures, because there are lots of Bitcoiners and all kinds of crypto enthusiasts in Switzerland, including companies who can help us reach their users. But when you need to have the majority of the people, that becomes more complicated, because you have all kinds of people who have no interest, no understanding, older people, younger people, people wherever who are just saying this is just a Ponzi. My party told me to vote no, I will vote no. Now let's say the people voted yes. Then in Switzerland we have another thing which is kind of similar to the US with the how is it called, like the electoral college. We have different states, and some states have more people, some states have fewer people. So you have to have the majority of the people, but you also have to have the majority of the states. The number of states do matter. You cannot have just, all the people in Zurich and Geneva overshadowing everybody else who is maybe in smaller states and who also have a say. So let's say we do have the majority of the people and the majority of states. Then in that case, it gets voted and then it's added to the constitution. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that now we have 18 months to gather the signatures, and then after that there will be at least let me get the number of months so that I'm not saying something stupid, but altogether it's going to be around 5 years, the whole process. So
5 years, yeah.
Wow. It's 18 months. It's 18 months to gather the signatures. Then we deposit it in front of the parliament, and then it's like 30 months, during which they will study it, make a counter proposal, voice their own opinion on whether or not it's a good idea or not. And then there is 12 months during which, if there is a counter project, they have to study it and they have to, come up with it properly. So that takes a year. And then after that, you have 10 to 16 months before it gets to being voted. So with all this in mind, if you think about it, between now and 5 years, there is a very big chance that the Swiss National Bank will be buying Bitcoin anyway. There is a very big chance, because there will be at least a cycle and a half, that people will be saying, of course I'm voting for this. And we won't even have to, we won't even have to convince them, because everybody will know what Bitcoin is. And as you know, from Switzerland, from being here, a lot of banks now are offering, all kinds of banks are offering all kinds of services, buying, selling, custodying, even lending with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And we're talking about like proper banks, including banks who belong to the state.
In Zug, the cantonal bank of Zug.
There is Lucerne, there is Zurich, there is Zug.
Not Geneva.
In Geneva, we have private banks, so they're
not cantonal,
not the cantonal one. And then you have the one that belongs to the actual government, the bank of the post office.
Yeah, of
which
course. Yeah.
belongs to the whole government by itself. And they're also offering, and they're very aggressive in the way they publicize it. They buy advertisement on social media. They buy billboards in the street, and they're saying, you should buy crypto, you should buy Bitcoin. So
You can buy Bitcoin with those little cards when you walk into the post office as well.
exactly, and since 2016, I think you can buy Bitcoin from all the vending machines, the ticket vending machines
Yeah.
of the train. Every train station in
Yeah.
Switzerland has a Bitcoin ATM. So with all this in mind, it is very possible that between now and in 5 years, it will become so ubiquitous that normal people will just say, yeah, of course, the Swiss National Bank has gold. Why doesn't it have Bitcoin? So it's we're very optimistic on one side and very cautious on the other. But one thing we don't have to worry about is politicians' veto.
Yeah.
That
So
that is that is the good part.
So, CJ, how long, like, let's assume everything just gets passed, it goes through, President-elect, who will then be President Trump, signs off. How long would that whole process take?
As long as Congress wants it to be. It doesn't have to be long at all.
Yeah.
Literally, technically, since the bill was introduced or the act was introduced July 31st of 2024, it could have got passed this year, but I don't think that they would even want to meet with it right now because the
Mm-hmm.
Democrats still control, they control the executive branch, Joe Biden, so it'd probably get vetoed. So they're probably just going to wait until the
Yeah.
new administration takes over. And I would not be surprised if it was one of the very first um, bills to get looked at. Um, a lot of people are backing it, lots of money. It's what it's what a lot of us believe that got Trump in office in the first place. So if he decided to, go back on his promises, the backlash would be enormous. And I don't think even he would want to do that. Um, so it wouldn't take long. It would definitely be under a year. Uh,
Wow.
it wouldn't be that long at all. Probably one session. So I don't know the exact time, but in my mind, probably within 6 months.
So let's say, like, best case scenario, it's approved. He takes office in January. So let's say by July, it's approved.
Mhm.
When then does the United States start to buy the 200,000 Bitcoin per year?
So it can be done immediately, but they want to make sure that it's spread out so that it's not affecting the
Hmm.
market. So they won't just buy 200,000 all at one time. They want to make sure that they're not influencing the market but too much. Um, and then so the way the bill is written is the goal is to accumulate up to a million Bitcoins over the course of 5 years.
Hmm.
Um, uh, right now we own about 240 something thousand Bitcoins ish. Don't quote me on the exact number. But that's more from like crimes that the Bitcoin just hold,
Yeah.
like the government holds on to. So if the government decides to keep that 200 something thousand Bitcoins, then it wouldn't be that we're buying 200,000 each year. The goal is to have a million total after
Hmm.
5 years. And the only way that they would sell it would be to pay off the national debt. Um, that's in the bill. That's what it says is over 20 years, we would not be doing any selling, um, anything like that whatsoever. We would hold on to it outside of to pay the national debt. Um, and so that's why we consider a strategic Bitcoin reserve asset, because the 35, $36 trillion that we owe, uh, a lot of politicians are worried about that because
As they
bricks
should
popped up.
be.
Yeah, bricks popped up because it was like, hey, you guys, debt is out of control. The interest that we're paying is outrageous. And so it's like other countries are looking at it like, well, if the US dollar collapses, then we need to make sure we have infrastructure in place to hold up, their respective countries. But now Trump is like, okay, so we're going to back the US dollar by Bitcoin and let's get rid of bricks, stop all the nonsense. America's still here. So within one election, we have a very different vision than it was with the prior administration.
And I think that's another key difference between, so I'll still say my understanding, because I didn't grow up in Switzerland, but my understanding between Switzerland and many other countries is the sense of political stability and the fact that it takes a long time for things to actually go through. So, Yves, a question for you. Let's say that in July, President-elect, then President Trump signs off on everything. Could that influence, for the better or for the worse, the Swiss National Bank or others to expedite adding Bitcoin to the Constitution?
So adding to the constitution, no, because the process would still be long and probably multi-year. Even if they said your initiative is obsolete because we want to put it in the constitution and we discussed among ourselves, that's going to take a while. However, we are not trying to get the Swiss National Bank to have Bitcoin, to own Bitcoin, because what we're trying to do is that they don't have a choice. But in reality, they can already own Bitcoin if they want to.
Yeah.
The Swiss National Bank already has reserves, quite a lot. The whole point of those reserves is not to make money, but to balance the economy so that they keep a certain stability for the Swiss franc and the Swiss economy and employment and everything. So they're buying all kinds of things. They're buying everything, basically. They're huge. But they're buying a whole bunch of US dollar denominated American stocks, for example. The Swiss National Bank owns a lot of stock from MicroStrategy.
Yeah.
It owns a lot of stock from, of course, the GAFAM, but also, for example, the Bitcoin miners who are traded publicly, Marathon, Hut 8, Riot. The Swiss National Bank today already owns stocks from those companies in their portfolio, in their treasury. So they don't need us to tell them to buy Bitcoin. So we are still trying to tell them, and we've been doing that for 2 years now, to tell them, you don't want that it becomes a political thing, because we don't want to tell you what to do. You know what you're doing, and the Swiss National Bank is pretty good at what they're doing in general. It's not there is no animosity from the Swiss population, but what we're telling them is first, it's a new technology that you need to understand. Second, some people call it gold 2.0, so you kind of have to have some so that you also prepare the future when there will be a big gold rush and all the countries will want to have some. But also, it's a good performing asset. For the last 15 years, it's one of the best performing assets. Why would you buy, MicroStrategy and NVIDIA and Tesla and not buy a few Bitcoin? Plus, technologically, and this comes from the previous president of the SNB, technologically, it's not a problem. They know how to do it, and they have an IT department. They know how to set up a cold wallet. And even if they didn't, there are so many banks now in Switzerland who are fully regulated, who could be taking care of that for them. The same way, for example, not all the Swiss gold is held by the Swiss National Bank. Some of it is even in the US. So it's not really a problem. They could be doing that. Now, one thing about all this is that they might already be holding Bitcoin, but
so this was a question
they're very opaque.
Yeah.
They're very opaque, so they're not telling us everything. And the reason why we know that they have all those US denominated stock is because of the American legal system, who forces big investors to fill forms and declare what they hold and everything. And of course, that after that becomes public. But if you go to the SNB's website, you will see, asset.
It's opaque,
or,
exactly. It's hard to know what it is.
But of course, they can be holding all kinds of things, and it's also good that they are kind of opaque, because you don't want people to be able to game the system and everything. But what we want is, because we've been asking politely once, because we've been asking politely twice, a year later, and a third time, 2 years later, and every time they tell us, well, we're not so convinced, what we want now is to also put them in a position that looks uncomfortable for them, but also allows them to say, you know what, of course we have some, and now we have to, we have to make it public because, if it's going to be in the Constitution, anyway, it's going to be public. But the way we manage to think about how to make it so that it's not too hostile, because we don't want to be hostile.
Yeah.
That's really not the point. Is that the current wording of the Constitution is that the some of the reserve have to be in gold. It doesn't say how much. It doesn't say neither an amount or percentage of the GDP or anything like that. It just says some of it. So it can be like one gold bar. It doesn't matter. They are in charge of making the choice the best way possible. And so what we're adding is just like and in Bitcoin, which means the same way they could have one Bitcoin, they could have 1 billion Swiss francs in Bitcoin, or they could have one Satoshi. It doesn't matter. But the moment that it becomes, the door is open, then of course the discussion will become much more interesting, and we hope that it will be a little bit less opaque.
Yeah. So, CJ, earlier you mentioned that you had a discussion with Senator Cynthia Lummis. And I'd like you, if you're comfortable and if you can disclose parts of your discussion, I'd like you to share what that discussion was about, and also what this act would mean for the American people, the average person or the average business.
So the discussion that we were talking about was more on the tax side of Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The tax side. Yep.
Spending Bitcoin as of right now in the States is a taxable event. So say if I were to just go to Starbucks and use some Bitcoin, then I'd have to pay a capital gains tax. And so Senator Lummis was saying, yeah, we want to eliminate some of that from a tax perspective, whether it's $100, $250, $300, whatever that threshold is. If you're spending Bitcoin, it should not be taxed, because we want to encourage the spending of Bitcoin, because as of right now, the IRS looks at Bitcoin as property. And so what she was trying to do was to add that. That's a separate bill than the strategic reserve bill. We discussed actually 2 years at the Bitcoin Policy Institute in DC. And so what this bill is the way it's going to affect the average person is that if they have Bitcoin, one, the price is going to go crazy high. But then two, is going to legitimize Bitcoin, because in the bill, it says that we have full rights to owning our private keys. See, in previous, like with the Biden administration, we had a Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was trying to eliminate the possibility. Yeah. She was like, let's get rid of private keys. Let's ban them being able to use their custody wallets. Let's tax them at higher rates. The type of anti-crypto army that she created and pushed against us was so outrageous. And so now with this bill, it'll affect everybody, because now we can feel comfortable owning our own private keys, self-custody, things of that nature. So that's great. So outside of price, also the ability to transact privately, or on our cold wallets without having to go through an exchange, that would be enormous.
It's funny. I listened to Michael Saylor. It's hard not to, because he's omnipresent, if I could use that term. And he does speak about Bitcoin as property, Bitcoin as a commodity. And I've noticed that his rhetoric has changed slightly. My personal opinion is that it took him a while to figure out how exactly to position MicroStrategy, because I think it was last year or a few months ago, he talked about digital ID on Bitcoin. He talked about a few other ideas. And then recently in, I think it was the last investor call, or maybe before that, he said MicroStrategy is a Bitcoin treasury company. So I think he's found the fit and the framing of what he wants to do. But he doesn't seem to promote the potential of Bitcoin being a medium of exchange. And I've always found that to be very interesting because for people, I've heard of a few people trying to develop a circular economy in the US. What would that mean for them, especially if he can influence maybe, I don't know, politicians or how laws are being written with respect to Bitcoin as a medium of exchange?
So we have monetary policy and we have fiscal policy. So monetary
Okay.
policy would mean that basically Bitcoin could become legal tender in the States.
Hmm.
That is not really up for discussion right now. That is
Okay.
pretty far off. That would require a lot of work, and nobody in the space right now seriously considers that a thing. Even President Trump, he loves the U.S. dollar, so we're probably
Yeah.
not going to introduce another currency to outrival the dollar. Even our chairman of the Federal Reserve, he basically said that Bitcoin is not a replacement of the U.S. dollar; it's a replacement of gold. The
Yeah.
U.S.
Yeah.
dollar is still, king, and instead of us backing the U.S. dollar by gold bars, now we would also, whether it's a combination or complete replacement, then it would be done through Bitcoin. So I don't think that the US is going to change its monetary policy, but the fiscal policy of being able to have Bitcoin held as a strategic reserve asset, that is very, very likely. And so that's the main goal right now on a federal level as well as on a states level. So individual states may be able to buy Bitcoin and hold it as well. That
Hmm.
fits right in line uh, with Senator Lummis' bill, that hey, the states can hold their own Bitcoin, the federal government can hold their own Bitcoin, and also move some of the power from the Federal Reserve to the government, which is interesting because the Federal Reserve is the one who prints out a bunch of money, and that's what causes inflation. And so we're having a lot of different ideas being
Hmm.
being put across, but also Michael Saylor, with all due respect, he's looking at Bitcoin as a financial instrument. The majority of
Yeah.
the people that are in my circle are looking at Bitcoin as freedom from oppression, being able to
Hmm.
transact globally, worldwide, without a middleman stopping it. Um, so Michael Saylor's language around Bitcoin is very different than my circle. Most of us
Yeah.
aren't looking to get rich, where most of us are looking to be able to transact freely, um, because the bank, they unbanked me. They unbank other people. They give us these crazy fees. And so we look at Bitcoin as freedom money versus a financial instrument to become the wealthiest person in the world.
Yeah, most definitely. And Eve, I've never thought to think of how Bitcoin transactions are treated by the Swiss government here. I mean, of course,
They're not
I mean,
they're not
go ahead.
taxed. They're not taxed. In Switzerland, in general, we don't have a capital gain tax.
Hmm.
It might change, but for the moment, it's not. We do have wealth tax. So if you are wealthy, you will pay a certain percentage of your net worth. But Bitcoin actually is considered wealth, the same level as gold. So if you have Bitcoin, it's the same as if you had, let's say, you have one Bitcoin, or you have 100,000 US dollars. At the end of the year, the fiscal year, which is like 31st of December, you will look at the exchange rate and you will check how much the value is in Swiss franc equivalent, and that will just be added to your wealth tax. So if you have, let's say, I don't know, 10,000 Satoshi, you are not taxed at all because it does. No, sorry. If you have 10,000 Satoshi and you don't go over the threshold of being taxed because you don't have enough wealth, then it won't be calculated and you won't be taxed on your Bitcoin. If you have 10,000 Satoshi and you have, I don't know, 5 million in gold, Picasso, and real estate, then you will have, that amount plus the exchange rate of 10,000 Satoshi at the 31st of December added, and that will be your wealth, and you will be paying a tax at the end of the year with that.
Yeah.
But there is no taxable event when you're transacting, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, moving outside of like the US and Switzerland slightly, Fast forward, so we'll use a 5-year timeline because that's what you had outlined, Yves. Fast
Hmm.
forward 5 years. Bitcoin is a strategic reserve in the US. It's been added to the Swiss Constitution. How are other countries reacting, in your opinion?
Do you
They'd
want to
have to
start,
catch
CJ?
on. Yeah, to me, they'd have to catch on,
Yep.
because hyper Bitcoinization to me is already like the wheels are already going,
Hmm.
where everything's going to be priced in, Bitcoin eventually. Even if the US dollars, if Bitcoin is backing the US dollar, but we hold Bitcoin as individuals, we're actually owning the actual asset that the world is paying attention to versus the US dollar, which is what we're just transacting with. And so to
Hmm.
me, Bitcoin has always been my savings account for many years. And so now to see the US doing it as well, it kind of just validates my strategy. But now the world is going to adapt the same exact strategy that, in my humble opinion, I feel like I created, whether I did or didn't. There may have been somebody who did it earlier that just didn't announce it. But that to me is now going to be the world's strategy, which is really cool. I know Jack Mallers from Strike, he does it as well.
And Yves, what do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree with the catching on part. There is a paradox with Bitcoin, and it goes back to what you were saying about Saylor earlier. Um, what gives value to Bitcoin is the fact that there are hundreds of thousands or millions of people out there, plebs, who are using it to evade inflation, to evade um, uh, the authority of a political regime, or to evade sanctions, for example. So this is what gives value to Bitcoin. Then after that, you have the conversion rate to the US dollar, which is the price of Bitcoin, but it's
Hmm.
not its value. So at the moment, it could be argued that gold only has value because the treasuries of countries and central banks are accumulating tons and tons of gold bars. But it's also the fact that everybody views gold as being valuable, and banks, private banks, commercial banks, value gold. People who have, I don't know, like a wedding or a birth, who will bring a little ingot as a present, or people who are using it for jewelry, even if it's a percentage that is much smaller than the amount of gold that is in the national banks. It is what makes people value gold, because at the end of the day, if all the gold, 100% of the gold in the world, was in the vaults of central banks, uh, the value is really just a big
Oh, I see what you're
convention
saying.
between
Yeah.
between central banks. It doesn't exist in the real world. So the thing with Bitcoin is, someone like Saylor does understand that he needs to adapt his narrative
Hmm.
and wording depending on who he's talking to. This is
Yeah.
also why he's changing these days, because now he's
Yeah.
doing things that are attracting attention of very big
Hmm.
institutions, banks. He's stepping on the ground of the ETF, like BlackRock. He's talking with politicians who might or might not be favorable to whatever he's doing. Also because he's issuing debt, so his loophole, his cheat code also involves things that are very regulated in the US. He
Yeah.
cannot just suddenly buy Bitcoin like he used to do. Now he's actually doing like financial instruments, issuing debts, highly scrutinized. So
Hmm.
depending on what he's doing, he's going to adapt the wording that he's using and his
Yeah.
views. Deep inside, I still think that he's the, there is no second best kind of guy. He understands that, but he also understands that his shareholders and himself and his business partners might not like this kind of language, which made him popular back in the days. But he's walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
The thing with the US suddenly getting 1 million Bitcoin, and the Swiss National Bank getting, I don't know, let's say 1 million Bitcoin, is that suddenly, let's say we have only 21 million, you have 10% that is inside central banks that will not move because then it becomes reserves and nobody's going to touch it. But you need to have, I don't know, 50%, 10%, whatever the number, 1% that is in normal people's hands for it to keep its value, to keep the fact that central banks are actually seeing it as something of value. So I think if, to answer your question, if suddenly in 5 years the US and Switzerland are moving very fast, of course there will be, like whatever, the European Central Bank, they hate it, but they will buy some. China, they hate it, but they will buy some. The Emirates, maybe they like it, maybe they don't like it, but they will buy some. Everybody will want to have some just the same way they want to have gold today. But if you look at gold, not all central banks are accumulating gold today. Some of them are. Some of them, especially in the BRICS, have been selling or they stopped buying treasury bonds from the US in favor of buying more gold and accumulating more gold. But not all central banks are buying gold and not all people are valuing gold. And some people are gold bugs and some people don't have gold because they don't care about it. But with Bitcoin, I think there will be a moment when there will be how do you call that? A country level FOMO where people will say, we need to have some, whatever it is, but we need to have some. We cannot be completely without. The same way, I don't know, if today, for example, all the countries had access to oil, and some of them are drilling, and some of them say we're not drilling, their people would be going crazy. Like, why would you want to not have energy if you have it available in your ground? So of course you have some countries who have access to certain things. You have some places where it's easier or less easy. And of course with Bitcoin, some countries, they won't have enough resources to have a very strong reserve. But I think every country will have to wake up and say, we cannot have zero. The zero will not be an option.
Yeah.
And to piggyback off of that, I think we also have to look at just the blockchain technology as a whole. The central bank digital currencies, they're starting to do live testing in America in 2025.
Oh, wow.
So I firmly believe that, with the IMF, coming out with their handbook, maybe I think last year, November, that the central bank digital currencies are going to be implemented as a monetary policy across the world. And so as the people realize that the government has more and more control over their money, programmable money, they'll naturally want to get into Bitcoin. And I believe that these governments, if they hold on to the Bitcoin, they hold on to it and they don't allow the people to have access to it, then essentially what Bitcoin was created for, which is freedom, may not really be addressed to the masses. And so I think like podcasts like this, I think us talking about it, just getting the word out, I think that's very important because I think the central bank digital currency can be the most oppressive form of money ever invented. And Bitcoin, to me, is an escape from that. But if you have people who don't hold on to it now, the Michael Saylors, the governments, once they accumulate all the Bitcoin, they're not selling it. So do you really own your Bitcoin, or you just have access through like an ETF? If you don't own your keys, then you don't really own your Bitcoin. So I think that what we're doing right now is very important. But I think that if the governments start to buy it and then the corporations start to buy it and none of them are selling, like Yves said, then it's like, well, what's the value in it? Well, the value, they'll probably provide the value through ETFs, through anything that you don't own your private key on. We'll give you access to the Bitcoin. You can get the monetary increases, but you don't have the freedom that it provides. And that's more important, especially with a central bank digital currency on the way.
The upside. I hadn't thought of that as a strategy to get governments to suck supply, essentially, like therefore forcing individuals to use whatever CBDC or whatever is available to them. But even Switzerland, I think there is an initiative as well to ensure that cash is always accepted. Like they cannot get rid of cash.
I'm not sure how far it is.
Okay.
I know there was one. I don't know if they are still gathering signatures or not. I'm not 100% sure. I know that in Switzerland, in general, cash is not something that people will let disappear. And the government is not necessarily, and Switzerland is a very unique, weird
Yeah.
place. But the government doesn't necessarily want to get rid of cash compared to a bunch of other places where the restrictions are already very high. Like in France, for example, if someone wants to pay you more than 1,000 euro, you have to declare it as the recipient of the money. You have to declare it because it's actually legal.
Yeah.
It's very strong. In Switzerland, you can still go and buy a 100,000 Swiss franc car in cash, and nobody bats an eye. It doesn't matter. So we're still in that system, but convenience is convenience. Especially with COVID and everything. Suddenly, a lot of places they don't want to have cash to deal with because of employees and whatnot, but it's not disappearing. It's still there.
Yeah.
I don't think that will be really a problem, and I don't think CBDCs are really an issue in Switzerland. They might become one, but at the moment, the Swiss National Bank, the whole system. So it's them and the stock exchange and the Bankers Association. They set up a system for interbanking CBDC. So like for the settlement that they do once a day, once a week, once a month, to expedite, to get rid of errors, to make sure that everything was using the same system so that you don't have one bank using an old system and another one using a new one. So they're setting up sorry, they already started last year, I think. But at the same time, the Swiss National Bank has been quite not vocal, but very transparent about the fact that they think that stablecoins may become the de facto Swiss CBDC, which means that at the moment, commercial banks are the ones who are creating money, and instead of creating money that would not so of course they create money that is digital, right? 90% of the money is digital still. But instead of creating money that would be directly into the system and from one bank to another bank, you get a loan from a bank and then you spend money or you put it in another bank in your bank account, it becomes very complicated. So the idea would be that they would be able to issue tokens that would be backed by Swiss francs, so that it becomes more compatible. Like if everybody was using the same blockchain and everybody's using the same. And what I think everybody is very afraid of is Tether, because Tether is the de facto US dollar CBDC, except it's private. But it's not that private because first they have to back with US dollars. And at the same time, they're backing with US dollars, and they're also investing and backing with US Treasury bonds. So they became a very big buyer of Treasury bonds. So they're helping the US economy both in the terms of helping them issue debt, but also at the same time, they're making sure of the hegemony of the US dollar in developing countries and countries with high inflation. Let's say, Lebanon, Turkey, Venezuela. People want to have dollar, and it's easier for them to have digital dollar. They don't really care if it's digital dollar that is on the Tron blockchain and issued by a private company who is in Lugano. They don't care as long as it works like dollars. So the US is on a very slippery slope. They enjoy that situation very much, but they also don't like it at all. So we'll see how this works. But in Switzerland, we don't have that at all. At the moment, the FINMA, which is the regulator for financial things, banks and whatnot, they issued something recently, I think this year, saying that if you are issuing a stable coin, you have to do KYC on every transaction. Which is just impossible.
Okay.
It's just impossible.
It's like the EU saying you have to list all of your wallets or whatever. Okay.
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. It's just not possible. But they issued that. A lot of people are scratching their head. A lot of people stopped their project because they were in the process of or were already issuing Swiss-backed stablecoin. I don't think that's going to last forever. I think they will paddle back and try to find a proper way to do it, because otherwise now it's just like it goes against everything. But I don't think in Switzerland CBDCs are really the issue. I do think that if the EU and the US were competing on who has the worst CBDC for their citizens, I think it will become horrible for people.
Yeah.
But that's the moment when, the same way like in Nigeria, they issued their CBDC, which the e-Naira. They made it very difficult for people to buy Bitcoin, exchange Bitcoin, sell Bitcoin, transact Bitcoin. They made it even difficult for people to have cash. They started putting limitations on ATMs. Restrictions on
Yeah.
anything that was not using the CBDC, and still the CBDC, nobody uses it, nobody cares. And Nigeria now is the place where the Bitcoin adoption is the fastest and the biggest. So I think we live in a world now where it's easier to get options, even if you live in a very oppressive regime who really wants you to, do what they want you to do. People will learn a lot of, and that's the thing in Switzerland and in New York and California, people don't learn because they don't have to,
It's
because they don't care.
comfortable. Yeah.
It's comfortable. It works. And people will still tell you, why do you need Bitcoin? My Venmo works very well and my debit
Yeah.
card works very well. Of course it does.
Or
But
twins.
or Twint in Switzerland. And it does work. It's fantastic. But the majority of the people in the world don't have access to that, and they cannot have access to that. So
Hmm.
they learn. And those people, in a way, they are, like people in El Salvador, um, they are not having the best life that they could be having yet. But at the same time, everybody has made at least one transaction. They all know how to use a digital wallet. Whereas in a lot of places here, if you go to see certain people, they will say, well, I like cash. I don't know how to use it. I'm too old for this. I don't want to use my phone. I don't trust my phone. In El Salvador, certainly everybody knows how to do it. In Venezuela, Lebanon, Turkey, everybody's learning how to do it because it's good for them. They want to. They have a real advantage learning. So I think the U.S. in general, politicians, they're not completely idiotic. I mean, they're running a country. I'm not, so hats off to them for running the U.S. But they also know that if they shoot themselves in the foot, it's not going to work. It cannot work. Um,
Do you think
if to
that
no,
level
go
of
ahead.
self-awareness exists
Yes.
where
Yeah. Yeah.
it's I'm sidetracking a little bit, but so in my circle, I've heard a lot of criticisms about Trump. So here in Geneva and amongst people who live in neighboring France. And I keep my mouth shut because my opinion is not popular, but I listen. And I I had a moment I didn't say anything where I thought though that he seems to be making steps in the right direction. At least he's open to Bitcoin, whereas in Europe, I'm just amazed at how people listen to what like Christine Lagarde has to say, for example, and still believes in that kind of that mindset. I feel also that in Switzerland, as you move closer to the French border, the mentality kind of becomes a little more Eurocentric as opposed to like Swiss in the German
Hmm.
speaking cantons. I see it reflected in a lot of the topics that we vote on, and also any discussion when it comes to Bitcoin or crypto. It just yeah, I forget what made me think of that, but yeah, I'm surprised that especially President-elect Trump, with all of the stereotypes that we've heard about him, has that level of self-awareness where he can take a step back and actually see what could be good for the United States. Maybe not the people, but at least the United States with respect to Bitcoin. No?
Well, so here in the States, first we have to look at who Trump is. So 2017, the Mueller report came out, and so he was already using Bitcoin with transactions with Russia. Like that's documented. But
Oh,
then
really?
publicly, correct. But publicly, he was saying Bitcoin was bad. He's not big into cryptocurrencies. Everything was uh, everything was really U.S. dollar, U.S. dollar, U.S. dollar. Um, I think what happens behind closed doors is they see, oh, this is a chance we can make money. I think it was less
Mm,
about freedom. I think it was more
hmm.
about, oh, we can make money with this. We can pay the national debt. And I believe just who Trump represents himself as, very egotistical. I think that his goal is to be able to say, hey, this is my mark on the US. We're going to pay off this entire 30 something trillion dollar debt that the US has. And to be honest with you, I think he's going to succeed. I think that he's probably going to go down as one of the most successful presidents in history. I just think that it's at the expense of who is the biggest question. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, those are considered great presidents, but they had slaves. So it's like, you can be great, but at the expense of who?
Yeah.
Even Hitler, up until the end, he united Germany and the monetary system was right. He was great until he wasn't. And so it's one of those things where I believe that he realized this is a way for America to bolster itself, to eliminate BRICS' possibility of taking over. This is the ability to be able to be a dominant country again financially, to bring all the people's jobs back to America because uh, a lot of black jobs were taken overseas. We were released as slaves, and they were like, well, we don't want to pay you a good wage, so we're going to outsource it to other countries where they'll work harder for less.
Hmm.
And so then it leaves a lot of black Americans here in the States to end up in prison. Because if you take away the jobs, you take away hope, then it leaves us with nothing. And then even if you bring in a lot of illegal immigrants coming in, they'll work for less than lower than minimum wage. So now it puts us even at a worse disadvantage. And so I think he sees a lot of the problem areas, and he's saying, well, this is America. We shouldn't have people sleeping on the streets. We shouldn't have this big homeless problem. What is really going on? And I think he's saying, okay, the way to fix this is just through Bitcoin. And so I think he talks to some really intelligent people, and a combination of his ego, combination of the intelligent people he's around, and then seeing a solution to all the problems. I think America's going to come out on top. Again, the biggest question to most people is just at the expense of who, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure about that yet.
So he really does represent hope. And the reason I state this and ask this is that I can only see, what my phone shows me basically, or my computer, what I see on the internet. I have no idea what it's actually like on the ground in the US with respect to migrants or homelessness or jobs being taken away. And so to hear you say that is yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like you seem to be confirming a lot of the reports that I've read.
Yeah, if you go to DC, like you'll see the beautiful White House, you'll see the
Hmm.
Capitol building, you see all these things. But if you walk 5 minutes away, you'll see a bunch of homeless people sleeping on the streets. Um, and so in certain states, I know in California, because the Olympics is going to be out there, they're making it illegal to have tents on the ground. So if you're, tenting or anything like that, camping, they'll just lock you up. And so we have a prison issue here in America because it's like we don't, not me particularly, but America itself doesn't want to see poor people. They don't want to see people on the streets. They don't want to see people homeless. But the way that they outsource the jobs to over countries, or they bring in people who are willing to work for less under the minimum wage, you are creating that homeless issue yourself through greed.
Hmm.
And so I think that Bitcoin is the way to solve that. I don't think he's looking at it as a way of freedom. I think he's looking at it as a way
Mm,
to, let's fix this homeless people problem because they're bringing down my property values everywhere I go, especially
I
in like New
see.
York. He's got all these skyscrapers, but literally you'll have homeless people sleeping right in front of it, and it ruins the property values. And so I think we're looking at it from two different perspectives, but as of right now, our causes align, and
Yeah, the
that's why you're
incentives align.
correct. The incentives align, and so you're seeing a lot of people that you would not see normally shaking hands or having a drink with or having a meal with. Their incentives align, so it's like, hey, this is what we're doing. So I
Let's
think
be friends.
correct, at least
So
for this topic.
you say at the expense of whom? Yves, I'd like to get your take on this. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Trump mentioned Tether moving to the US. Tether is based in Lugano, Switzerland. Do you think that we could see more and more Swiss companies or European companies perhaps moving to the US because the sort of the infrastructure is so innovation friendly and tech friendly?
I don't see Tether moving to the US one bit, like
No?
even in a million years. No, definitely not. Also, okay, just to be the contrarian,
Yeah.
Trump says a lot of things. Trump said $100,000 per Bitcoin, you're welcome, as if it was him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, okay, so yeah,
That's
he
the
says a
ego
lot of
side.
things.
That's the ego side
Yes,
I was talking about
and
But
for
it's
and
sure.
let's
entertaining though, right? Like,
I didn't say it wasn't. I'm
yeah.
saying you have to take everything with a grain of salt. When he says, of course, Tether is going to move, I'm pretty sure he hasn't even talked to anyone from Tether to even ask if they wanted to move, and the answer will be no. Let's not forget that he launched his
Yeah.
shitcoin during the presidential campaign.
That was
Uh,
surreal. I thought that was a joke.
so you cannot say he's pro Bitcoin when he's actually creating a shitcoin saying I love the US dollar, and by the way it wasn't that good and it didn't work very well, but he still made money out of it because he's the star in the middle of the show. I do think one thing though. First, as we mentioned earlier, the US have seized 200,000 Bitcoin, more or less, which could be changed automatically with a magic wand from being seized property into part of the treasury. And that I think he's maybe him and Senator Loomis are the first one who are actually saying, why don't we? But everybody was thinking about it. Everybody wants to have more money in their wallet at the end. But it was something that people could attack you saying, why would you want to have Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is not good. But then if you sell it for US dollars. Why would you sell it for US dollars when you're the one printing the US dollar in the first place? You don't even have to sell the Bitcoin. So they had that like golden egg goose, which was also a little bit toxic. And nobody wanted to touch it, but everybody wanted to benefit from it. And they are the ones who are saying, why don't we? Because now the climate is a little bit better. And it allows them also to be the ones who say, unpopular opinion, blah, blah, blah. But, it's Trump. So unpopular opinion makes that everybody talks about him. If Biden had done that, people would say, yeah, big deal. But the fact that it's Trump, suddenly he's like the guy who is thinking about the future. But he's thinking about the future so much that when he went to do the speech in Nashville, he was like, his closing statement, like, have fun with whatever crypto you're playing with
Oh,
or
yeah.
whatever. He does. In reality, he's a politician. He's a good politician, but he doesn't give a shit. Like, let's be very, very honest. He is, in a political campaign, he wants to tell people what they want to hear, but he needs to be very careful that he doesn't say something that can come and bite him in the ass from another group. So he's not going to say, I'm pro abortion on one side and I'm against abortion on the other, because of course everything is public. But if he comes and he says, I want more jobs and I want more mining and I want more Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain and the industry, and people will say, well, he's thinking about the future. And it is true that the mining industry is starting to become more and more and more comfortable in the US. But the US, just like Switzerland, as a country doesn't really exist. It's the United States. So the miners are not in California or in New York. They're in Texas because Texas is very advanced in thinking about it. And Senator Loomis is from
And they have the
Wyoming.
resources for it too.
They have the
Yeah.
resources. They have a special system. Their electrical grid doesn't work the same as everywhere else in the U.S. Wyoming is Wyoming. They can do a lot of things because also they're a little bit on the fringe. So if it was New York doing something, it would be a big deal. But because it's Wyoming, it's okay. So this is something that is very interesting in the US, and it's very unique. And surprisingly enough, we have also something like that in Switzerland, where, one canton has their own specific rules, their own specific laws, their own, we have 4 different languages in Switzerland.
Yeah.
So at the moment right now, Tether is very happy in Lugano. I'm not talking with them, I don't know, but from what we can gather, they're very happy in Lugano. They're establishing themselves in El Salvador, and they're investing in mining in El Salvador. They have absolutely no reason, there is no justification for Tether to go to the US. The same way, there was no justification for FTX to come to the US. Everybody loves them. They love everybody. The system works very fine. They're invited everywhere, like everything was legal and transparent and fantastic for everybody involved. But at the end of the day, the US are very happy that it's not on US jurisdiction, and Tether is very happy that they're not on US jurisdiction, and everybody benefits from this equilibrium. And meanwhile, Trump can be Trump. Like, he doesn't have to have Tether coming. He can be Trump. He can bring back the jobs. He can make fiscal giving like advantages to miners who want to hire people or invest in new infrastructure. He can be Trump 100%. He will be a hero. It will actually bring jobs and expertise and resources. It will benefit everybody at the end. And going back to paying the debt, nobody wants to pay the debt. Everybody is upset with the debt, but nobody wants to pay the debt. At the moment, maybe they want to reimburse some of it because the interests is too high. But at the end of the day, they print money, and everybody, like, when you think about it, what is the interest? The fact that they're paying high interest is because there are so many people around the world who want to buy treasury bonds. You have a little bit of money, you go to your banker and you say, I want something stable, I want to make sure that it's safe, and I want to put money aside, and I want to be able to beat inflation. And your banker will say, buy treasury bond. It's safe. It's, the US will never default. You'll be fine. You'll get your 2%, 3%, whatever percent, and you'll be fine. And, at the end, when it's expired, you renew it. Nobody wants to get rid of the debt. The US are very happy that they can print money, and they're very happy that their money is slightly devalued so that they can compete with China, who is devaluing for like decades. So the only thing is they don't want that it gets perceived as getting out of hand. And it did get perceived as getting out of hand when the BRICS started saying, we don't want to buy treasury bonds anymore. We want to buy gold because gold is neutral. So that is not good. But at the end of the day, if Senator Loomis's idea of getting some of the gold, gold certificates and evaluating them at their proper value and selling or using it so that they can print more money so that they can get Bitcoin, and at the same time they get the Bitcoin that they already have and they put it in the treasury, they get 250, 500,000 Bitcoin. It's huge, and you can do a whole bunch of things with it, and you don't even have to go to the million. The million can be like a nice goal, and by the end of 5 years, people will have forgotten. And anyway, it won't be Trump anymore. So he will say, well, I brought everything forward. It was perfect. And
it
the
was
next
huge.
guy, it was huge. and everything got destroyed by the next guy and whatever. But at the end of the day, yeah, with 500,000 Bitcoin, you can change a lot, the panorama, like the worldwide landscape of the US dollar. And I think this is the game that they're playing. Nobody wants to fix, okay, let's go into conspiracy. People who are making medicine, they don't want you to be healthy. Like, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to know that they don't want you to be healthy. They want you to be sick so that you get more medicine. It's normal. You can't blame them for that. That's their business. And the shareholders want that. Of course, it would be better if there was more prevention and everybody could be healthy and they make money out of it. That would be fantastic. But at the moment, they're taking the easy way, which is First you get sick, then we cure you. And it's the same with the debt. You want more debt. It's been like this since the 30s. The executive order, what is it, FDR, when he devalued the gold. He devalued the dollar against the gold, and he seized all the gold. Like Executive Order 6102, right? You're a Bitcoiner, you have to know that.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
without a
So
doubt.
so anyway, they seized all the gold, they devalued the dollar, and then after that they could, fight the war, be happy, become the world reserve currency, blah, 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 Bretton Woods, fast forward, devalue, higher debt. Eventually it's Nixon, and then it becomes full fiat and the dollar is backed by nothing. This whole evolution has been nonstop, Republican and Democrats, since the 30s. Everybody benefits from it in the US. US government benefits from it. US as a country benefits from it. It's not good for, as CJ said earlier, there are lots of people who are suffering from it, who are actually being hurt by it. But as the US dollar, US hegemony, world reserve currency, blah, 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 it's been beneficial since the 30s. They don't want to get rid of they can print money as they want, and everybody's, playing the game. Why would they change the rules? They don't have to change the rules, but they can make it more acceptable. They can make it, creating jobs and making things a little bit better for everybody, which I'm sure Trump's entourage will try to be doing, because they're not stupid, and they would rather have a great legacy and look good and get rich in the process, and having,
Yeah.
as you said, having fewer people in the street just in front of your very expensive skyscraper. Of course, you would rather that everybody is happy, but half of the U.S. is not happy, and as you said, I only see it from my phone as well. But when I went to California and I saw people sleeping in the street,
Yeah.
it's not good. It's not good. When there was COVID and everybody left San Francisco, and you started having companies closing down because they were saying the streets are becoming unsafe for our employees, it's not a good look. But will they want to go back to zero, clean off everything, when they can just clean maybe 10% of it and, still benefit? Of course not.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I say that as a Swiss because I'm not an American. If I was an American, maybe I would have a different view. But from the outside, of course, the U.S. is fantastic. But even the way they're fighting with commercially with China, China is getting more and more business relationship investment throughout the world, including all the way to South America. Central and South America. Of course, the U.S. they have to fight this, because as a country, as a huge country, as a superpower, they cannot let that happen without fighting. And I think they see that Bitcoin can be helpful for them. They see that they can fix some of the things that are making it worse instead of making it better. But it's not going to be by reimbursing the debt. It's going to be by having more mining facilities. It's going to be by having, a new Silicon Valley, let's say in Wyoming, where suddenly you have like all the biggest brains coming and establishing themselves and hiring people and, creating a real ecosystem there. It's going to be with like smaller Bitcoin oriented financial services that can start operating like banks, but not being banks, so that you can start having, like the Coinbase and Kraken and whatnot. And this is what they want to be doing in the first place, but they've been fighting. And I think Trump could be doing something very good, but let's not assume that he knows what he's doing, because at the moment, I think he has no idea.
I have a different view. I think he does. I think America's going to get right when it comes to the finances, whether it's the whole debt or not. I definitely think a portion of it, just because his ego is going to push it so far forward that I think that's going to be one of his signatures. Hey, I paid off half of the U.S. debt. I saved the American economy. I could just picture him going up there, after his
That would be
4 years.
fantastic. Yeah.
I saved the U.S. economy, paid off half the debt. We continue this going forward. We brought the jobs back. We cleared off the streets. We brought jobs back. We lowered the prison rates. I could easily see him talking on a lot of those points, just through his ego. But as somebody who, like I said, on these topics we connect, I'm all for it.
I mentioned earlier that I don't like politics, and I've always been super cynical. And I think I've said publicly before that it doesn't matter if it's left or right. Like there's a mechanism that controls most Western politics, anyways. But I have to admit that for the first time, I do feel a sense of hope, which is ironic because I'm not American. I don't like politics, but the vibe just seems hopeful. We shall see how things actually play out. And when I say hopeful, I'm referring to individual plebs as opposed to the US as a whole, because I think that, Trump speaks about punishing countries that don't use the US dollar. I'm not sure he's in a position to dictate what countries decide to do. I think that BRICS nations have been developing for quite some time. They have resources in place. There was a summit a few months ago in which they spoke about, what currency they want to use with respect to trade and stuff. So I think it might be very difficult for any American president. It doesn't have to be like it. It's not about Trump per se, but for anyone, I think it would be very difficult now to sort of put the train back on track where the U.S. dollar remains the currency that's used in trade by everyone.
Yeah, I think the tariffs is the biggest thing. So if we go back to like the 90s, we could go back to the 60s. Like most, like this in the 1960s, once Black Americans were able to vote, and
Hmm.
actually have certain powers in this country, they started to outsource those jobs to other countries. When they
Hmm.
outsourced those jobs to other countries, a lot of Black Americans who were doing like labor intensive jobs all of a sudden had no workforce. And then when you have like the evil side of it, where it's like, okay, well then we'll give them drugs, and we'll give them guns
Yeah.
randomly, then all of a sudden the prison population skyrockets. So it's like, let's take their jobs away, outsource it, put them in the prisons, and then slavery is only legal in America through the prison system. So you mentioned
Hmm.
Texas and California; those are the two most populated prisons, and prison labor is
Yeah.
still legal. So America's still making money off of prisons. We're 5% of the world population, 25% of the prison population. And so you have a lot of Black Americans who are incarcerated, still doing slave labor, even though slavery is technically illegal. The loophole is unless it's through prisons. And so now, if you're able to bring some of those jobs back, if the robots don't take them, and you can bring back some of those jobs back, then you can get more people to work, and it brings a lot of hope to people. I
Hmm.
think that a lot of times when you're listening to the media, it's very skewed. And because most people don't really understand finances,
Hmm.
they will emotionally attach themselves to a certain party or to a certain ideology. So, for instance, in California, they said, hey, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour. And people were like, yes, we can finally have a fair, standard of living. But they don't realize that then those companies, all they did is just create robots. So now you don't even
Yeah.
have somebody at the McDonald's to order your food anymore. So they eliminated your job.
Yeah.
You asked for more, they eliminated it. No difference in the 60s when we all of a sudden, were able to have our voting rights and be able to work, the same amount. They say, okay, we're going to eliminate your job. We're going to send it overseas. So you have to be cognizant of what you're asking for and then be
Yeah.
able to deal with it. And so I think for a lot of Black Americans, we look at it as, hey, we have access to an asset that we've never been able to have access
Yeah.
to. We were the asset originally, right? We were the
Yeah.
property. Then it went to um, uh, like a lot of these corporations, like these stocks. We have different levels of rounds of being able to invest. And so most of us, if we're not considered an accredited investor, meaning we're not
Yeah.
worth like $2 million or we make $250,000 a year, we're not able to get in when the wealthy people get in. So they block the access to almost every single major way for us to make money outside of, sports or entertainment. It's like, well, how are we able to advance in this? If we go to college, we got all this massive debt. If we, um, we it's like almost anything. We can't get the house property because they might charge us higher rates. It's like, well, how are we able? So we finally found a Bitcoin. And one thing I can say about Trump is he met with one of my friends, Dr. Jamar Montgomery. And Dr. Jamar Montgomery is a young black man who graduated from college, I think at 19, with his doctorate degree. So he's considered a genius. He speaks in Geneva, Switzerland at the World Economic
Oh,
Forum.
ah,
So funny story, funny story. Trump had invited Kanye West to the White House. And Kanye brought Dr. Jamar Montgomery as well as Nick Fuentes. So the media, all they said was Trump's meeting with a white supremacist. I don't like Nick Fuentes at all. I agree, he's a white supremacist.
sorry, who's
But
Nick Fuentes?
he's a white supremacist.
Okay.
And he's like this young, arrogant guy who just talks out the side of his neck all the time. I don't like him. But they made it seem like Trump brought him. Trump brought Kanye. Kanye brought Nick Fuentes, but he also brought Dr. Jamar Montgomery. So you had two white men, two black men discussing cryptocurrency, policies, things of that nature. And a lot of the things that Dr. Jamar Montgomery had discussed, Trump took a lot of that stuff and used it um, for his campaign,
Oh,
which
okay.
led to some of the policies be creating. Now, he's never mentioned Dr. Jamar Montgomery, not one time. We don't get the credit here in America. Even if you look at the administration he's bringing in, the only, I think, black person that's in the administration is over like Section 8, urban development.
Okay.
So it's like
And
we may
Section 8
not,
is a type of housing, right? I know this because of
correct.
Kendrick Lamar, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like it feels disrespectful. So you'll have a lot of
Hmm.
people who are like, man, he doesn't respect you. You had Brian Donalds, you had Tim Scott. These were black men who were trying to advocate for Trump, but then none of them got the jobs. Um, but if you look at the actual crypto policies that he put in place, they were almost like 99.9% in line with what we wanted. So as somebody who's not as egotistical, somebody who just wants things to be done correctly, I'm okay
Yeah.
with the policies that were accepted because, hey, Dr. Jamar Montgomery presented these to you and you took some of them and then you saw that you could get rich. And for this one moment, we're very aligned. And if that means that
Hmm.
the prison population can hopefully be reduced, hopefully that's a hopeful, um, I'm all for it because there's no reason why we have so many people in prison and so many homeless people when we're considered the wealthiest nation in the world. But literally, I can't walk in any downtown city in the entire country and not see people struggling, sleeping.
Yeah.
It stinks because they're peeing on themselves to stay warm. It's just a crazy environment to see a multi-billion dollar or multi-million dollar company with these skyscrapers, and at the bottom you see complete chaos, especially in New York City. So it's like if somebody can bring hope and then actually have plans on doing it, and if all I have to do is educate my communities, hey, hold Bitcoin, hold your private keys, and everything will be okay eventually, then I'm all for it.
So, do you think so you cannot speak for all Black Americans, but do you think that there's a possibility that as the fiat price of Bitcoin or the purchasing power of Bitcoin increases, that members of the Black community in the United States who hold Bitcoin will just go elsewhere because of the freedom and the flexibility that Bitcoin brings to them?
It's possible. I know myself personally, I'm taking a world tour all 2025, just going from country to country, just to see how the world is different. Um, I know a lot of people have discussed going back to Africa,
Hmm.
simply because of the conditions in the
Where in
States.
Africa?
So right now I'm in Kenya,
No,
but a lot of people are
people
going
of,
to Ghana.
oh, Ghana. Okay.
A lot of people are going to Ghana. Um, the cost of living is a lot cheaper, and uh, they've been very welcoming to Black Americans, and
Hmm.
so a lot of people are discussing it. I'm checking out the scene. A lot of other people are doing the same thing. And it's not because America's not beautiful. It's just it feels very weird to be treated like a second class citizen. And it's very difficult to try to explain to them, hey, if you travel the world, all of a sudden you're
Yeah.
rich. You're wealthy if you go to some of these other countries. And we don't see that in the States because, we're dealing with the police, we're dealing with the extreme high prison rates. And, most of the prisons are filled with Black Americans and, like, period. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure it's probably like 60% of the prison population is Black Americans. And it's done intentionally. It's not that we're doing things that are way worse. It's that we're targeted, and that targeting uh, creates a loss of hope. And when people lose hope,
Hmm.
then they do crazy things. And then when the media portrays all the crazy things, it scares the
Yeah.
world because it's like, oh my gosh, that's how they are out there. Who taught us that? You get what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if we derive from Africa, then we're the same. If you see differences that are that drastically different, we were taught these behaviors. Um, and so we see a lot of that. People say, well, why do Black Americans kill each other at such a high rate? Well, let's look at the world scale. Who's killing who on a world scale? If you don't consider a war uh, killing each other, then yeah, then you're just changing the name of killing from war to murder, but it's still the same thing if you're killing people. And so I think globally, I think we're all the same. I think we all have a certain amount of evil, certain amount of great. I don't really look at race as something that um, makes you a good or bad person. I think you have good and bad people in
Yeah.
all races, but in America, we're targeted, and through that targeting, it a lot of people want to leave because it can be your son, it can be your brother. Um,
Wow.
and so a lot of people are actively looking at going to Africa where there's an embrace. It's like, oh, come back home. And if your
In Ghana,
money,
not so much Gabon. Go to Gabon and tell me if you're
yeah, yeah,
accepted with open arms, you know?
no, but that's why we're looking at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ghana's the main place that people have talked about. I'm looking at Kenya and I'm like, this is not bad here, but not everywhere. But I haven't been there,
Hmm.
so I don't want to speak firsthand about every country.
Yeah, yeah.
Africa is huge.
Yeah,
Most of us don't
exactly.
even
It's
know.
very diverse.
Most of us don't even know that Africa is that big. Most of us think that Africa is just one country, and a lot of people look
Not
at
at all.
Africa, like even if you look at our like maps, they show Greenland so much bigger than Africa, and in reality,
Yeah.
Africa is like 120 times bigger than Greenland. So even, I mean, it's just so many things. When we see the TV, we see the African starving, and bugs all
Yeah, the
around them,
stereotypes.
the
Yeah.
stereotypes. And not to say that doesn't exist, but we have just as bad in the States. You got
Hmm.
little kids who are, who are drinking the water from, the sewers because they don't want their parents to go to jail, so the
Wow.
parents are hiding them in certain places
Oh
because you
dear.
have truancy rules where if you don't go to school, the parents can go to jail. Shout
Hmm.
outs to Kamala Harris. So it's like, it's more complicated than people realize.
Yeah, it's um so I've traveled, so I'm born and raised in Canada. I've traveled throughout the US as a teenager playing basketball, visiting and stuff. I've been to Gabon, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Morocco, South Africa. I've traveled to a bunch of different European countries. I've settled with my husband in Switzerland. I'm a proud Swiss citizen today. And I have to say that this notion of blackness and black American, I say this because people think I'm American just because most people outside the US can't tell that I have a Canadian accent. And so the sort of projection I get when they think I'm American and when I say, oh no, like this is my story, so to speak, it changes when I tell them a little bit more about myself. But I will say that I found, especially through Bitcoin as well, that the notion of blackness that's portrayed in the US is not, in my experience, is not the same in other regions. So, for example, here in Geneva, there are a lot of people who are Africans. They moved here from different countries. And so they will approach me and ask me, they won't say you're black, they'll say like you're. Pud or Fulani, like they're very specific with the ethnicity. Like it's not about just dark skin, it's more specific, more regional, and more localized. And that's opened my perspective to how we sort of interpret people when we see them. And so in having discussions with Black Americans, and I say Black Americans because that's how you identify, I find it to be very fascinating. And then the Bitcoin layer on top of all of this, the freedom to go and explore and live in different places for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years, I think will, yeah, it'll just open perspectives even more and sort of, give you an opportunity to look at things from the outside in and yeah.
And that's
my little
that's the
spiel.
hope that it's bringing, because when you've felt hopeless. And the thing is, like, now that I'm in Africa, a lot of people are like, well, you guys are rich because we bring our
Yeah.
money from America out here, but we don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
that out there. Because when you're treated a certain way, or, you have certain experiences, you don't feel that. But if you can have now Bitcoin, where you have the ability to transact worldwide
Yeah.
without the government interference, because they shut down my bank account. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, why? They
That's
don't tell you
incredible.
why. And it's like I didn't go over my balance. Like, I didn't go below zero, but they don't tell you why. They have so
Mm-hmm.
much power, so much control. They don't have to answer to you. And it's like, now I have an asset that I don't need you to answer. I don't need you to answer. Like, you don't need to know how much money I have. You don't need to know who I'm transacting with. I'll make
That's
sure I
very
report on my
Swiss.
taxes. Correct. Correct. But we haven't had that.
Yeah. Eve, how is it that like the Swiss people figured everything out so long ago? I feel like so Geneva is a little bit more like France, but it's still Switzerland. And the further into Switzerland I travel, like I've been to Glarus, for example, I find that people they really don't care about me, for example. No one is asking me questions. No one is asking me my business. Like, it's a different type of freedom. Whereas, in France, for example, I could be profiled if I go shopping. One lady, I was with my husband shopping in just a random store, and she followed me around the store, which has happened to me in Chicago as well. And I'm like, this is crazy. But in Switzerland, stuff like that never happens. How did you guys get to this, or how did we, because I'm Swiss now, get to a point where we actually leave people alone? Like we don't, we don't bother people on the streets.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it also comes from how Switzerland was built.
Yeah.
Switzerland was built from people who were there and wanted to defend their small communities, and they allied.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how it started, with the first three states who made a pact, and then they said, when what was it? The Austrian, the Habsburg are coming. We're gonna unite so that we can fight them back, and we can protect our little pieces of mountains.
Yeah.
The U.S. is very different.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the history of the U.S. is a history of conquest, which is super glorious and everything, like going to the West and everything. But it was built completely differently. So it's not so much that the U.S. was behaving like an empire until super recently, as opposed to, let's say, Britain and who created the U.S. in the first place, or France, or but the U.S. is a place of, I don't know, conquest and taking over and building something where there was nothing, kind of thing. Whereas Switzerland is more about, we just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
So I assume this is one thing. The second thing is Switzerland is tiny. It's 8 million people today. The size of it is a postage stamp. It's the size of like I don't know,
A
like a
small
district
town.
in the US. It's like a village. It's the size of whole Switzerland. When people are taking their car for 2 hours in Switzerland, they think that they're traveling. Whereas, like people in London or Paris, that's their daily commute because they
Yeah.
live in the suburbs. And in the US, when people are going from like New York to California, they're saying, oh, I have to take the plane, but I'll be back tonight. We're on a completely different scale. But it only works if it stays kind of tiny and
Yeah.
communities are very tiny. One thing we didn't discuss about, but on a political scale, is it's very similar to the US, where like each canton and even each commune can have their own different regulations. Of course, they have the different tax system. So there is a lot of community. You live in a village, you know your village, you work in your village, you vote in your village. And of course, if people are coming, it's like you're in a small island. So if they come and they say, I want to take over, Swiss people will not be very nice with you. If you come and you say, I'll just establish myself, but I want to learn the language and I
Yeah.
want to participate in the network, economic, cultural, then people will welcome you, because there's this very funny story. I think it was a podcast from This American Life or something. There was this woman who moved to Switzerland, and she was very upset with the bells, the church bells. And
Yeah.
of course, you have the cowbells and you have the church bells. And she was very upset, and she was trying to fight the legal system to make that at night there wouldn't be the bells. And people were saying, well, if you don't like it, why are you here? Because
Yeah.
this is our culture, this is what we want. But what was funny is that eventually she applied to become a Swiss citizen, and she did the whole thing. And of course, everybody was upset at her because she wanted to become Swiss, but they saw her like kind of like a foreigner who wanted to change everything. The moment she became Swiss, she started respecting the bells and actually defending them, because she was saying, at the end of the day, I'm Swiss, I'm here. I don't like it, but I like the fact that they're there and people will defend their culture and everything. This is something that you find in the US when two people from the US talk. They never say, where are you from? I'm from America. Like one guy will say, I'm from Chicago. The other one will say, I'm from Montana. And they actually identify more with their state than with the whole
Yeah.
country, because the whole country, it doesn't exist in reality. It exists like for the money and taxes and war, but that's about it. Otherwise, everybody identify with their city, with their community, with their state. And I think Switzerland is embracing this, whereas everywhere else in the world, it becomes like it becomes a source of conflict. Like people from Marseille in the south of France
Oh
and
yeah,
people
in
from
Paris.
Paris, they hate each other,
Yeah.
but they don't have to. That's the whole point. It's because everything is centralized in Paris that the people from
Yeah.
outside of Paris are saying Parisians are obnoxious. And it's the same thing with California and New York. Everybody in the middle of the US are saying, on the coast, they're so arrogant. But in reality, if you just embrace your community and you live in your community, it works so much better. But you don't have to unite against somebody else. But this is like human nature, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to go back to what you were saying earlier, one thing that is very interesting is that, fix the money, fix the world. Bitcoin, if you are in the US and you're part of a minority and it doesn't work, but someone comes and helps you, like CJ, to learn more and start saving and put aside and understand that money is not working for you, but usually it's working against you, you might not be completely comfortable with it. If you know that China and Saudi Arabia and Russia and let's be crazy, North Korea and Switzerland are investing and buying Bitcoin because now it became their new gold, then you are somewhere in the suburbs of wherever, San Francisco or Chicago or Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, and suddenly you know that somewhere else in the rest of the world is valuing that thing, and you can start saving in it knowing that that money actually has value worldwide, not just in your community. And I think this is something that's going to change the mentalities so much, because suddenly Bitcoin becomes universal again, like gold was. Whereas up until now, everybody has to save in their own currency. Some of them, they have good or bad currency. The only way to escape it is to go to the dollar. And today, suddenly you have a neutral currency that people in the US and outside of the US can start theorizing. They can start saving and accumulating, knowing that the rest of the world is in line with them. This is completely different. This is something we never had before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
CJ, quick
definitely agree.
question for you. Outside of Bitcoin, did you engage in discussions or conferences with people who live outside the US? Like, if
Yes.
it weren't for
So,
Bitcoin, would you be doing this?
so in college, I went to HBCU, Texas Southern University, Houston.
Hmm.
We had a lot of people from a lot of countries. So I'm very familiar with uh, a lot of people from different places, whether Venezuela, Mexico, Nigeria, Kenya. And I've always wanted to travel. Um,
Yeah.
Before I was an adult, I saw my dad, he worked for SAP. And so I've been to
Oh, yeah.
Germany,
Okay.
Italy, France, Australia. So I've already been exposed to certain countries. But when I bring those experiences back to the States, um, the vast majority of the people that I grew up with, they have no idea about these places. It
Okay.
just seems foreign. So I've always, my dad planted those seeds in me as a young man. But I was fortunate enough to have a father. Most of my
Yeah.
friends didn't have fathers. Either they got killed or they were in jail or, whatever, for whatever reason. And so uh, through that, I've been able to know that hey, I want to travel, and now I just was given the opportunity to be able to do it through Bitcoin um, because I quit my job in 2016 because they were just working. They were working me from 8 in the morning past midnight and not paying me for those extra hours because I was salary. So I was one of the best people on the team, but they just overworked me because they said, well, what else? Where else are you gonna go? You get what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So they take advantage of you knowing that you don't have too many other options. Um, and so through that, I was like, okay, I just learned everything I need to learn. I'm grateful that they actually gave me work that led to me being able to leave. And so I
Yeah.
took that, built it for myself, and then through that process, I found Bitcoin. And then through a group called the Black Bitcoin Billionaires on Clubhouse, I'm meeting people from around the world. So before it was a centralized college or a
Yeah.
centralized, area where we would all come together, but now I'm meeting the best of the best from around the world. And so now here in Kenya, I've got people I can call and be like, hey, never met you before in life, but let's go meet up. And it's like that everywhere I'm traveling to, whether it's one state to another state, whether it's another country to another country. I now know people that are like-minded, and it has nothing to do with race, has nothing to do with ethnicity or where they're from. It's just, hey, we're like-minded. We think about Bitcoin. We understand, like Yves said, fix the money, fix the world. And so like we're like-minded on this one area, and it's just a blessing, like all the way around, because my eyes are wide open. And even just the little season my dad sowed in me, I had no idea that it was like this. Now I'm like, oh, this is the world. It's my first time going as an adult, and I'm just like, this is fantastic. But if you go back to the States, I'm considered one of the most traveled people in my neighborhood, which is crazy because, yes, I've been to like maybe 30, 35 states, but this was my first time sleeping out the country since I was 17. It's been
Yeah.
17 years. That's not well traveled. People from other countries, you go to another country every year and you speak multiple languages. We don't have that exposure. Most people in America only speak English and that's it. And people pride themselves on, no, this is America. We speak English. You go to other places, it's like, Eve just said that there's four languages in Switzerland. Like if you go to Kenya, they speak Swahili, they speak English. You
Yeah.
go to Nigeria, they might speak Igbo, they speak English. Like, Gabon, they speak French. It's like, whoa. So people outside the States speak multiple languages, but yet the Americans are the ignorant ones that are proud to be ignorant. But like Eve said, it's based off of how America was built. There were people here. There were like if you look at Mount Rushmore, that was a sculpture that was already there from the Native Americans.
Oh.
They redid it and changed it into the presidents, the same presidents that enslaved people, the same presidents who had people killed. So it's like they rewrote the history to make themselves great. Um, and then when you're born into it, you don't know your history. They're,
Yeah.
you
It's
know,
normal. Yeah.
I say second class citizen, but it's like, okay, then where do we go as first? I don't know. Like, I don't know where I'm from. I just know I'm from America. So, there is no Kenyan. There is no Leonian. Like, I don't know. I just know I was born here and, now I have to go figure out for myself, where do I fit in? Um, and so Bitcoin has given me the opportunity to be able to connect with like-minded people around the world And then because the price has gone up, I'm financially okay, and the bank can't just shut down my Bitcoin like they did with
Ha
my US
ha.
dollar. Exactly.
Yeah. So I love the way the topic is, the road to Bitcoin as a reserve asset, and we get back to the plebs. I think that this is highly symbolic of how a lot of Bitcoiners think. It's exciting to talk about the developments that are happening in the U.S., in Switzerland. It's exciting to contribute, like you both, and to participate. But at the end of the day, it's really about the plebs and how we manage and how we interact and how we transact as well. We've been recording for an hour and 48 minutes. I think we're going to wrap it up. This was an excellent conversation. Yves, CJ, do you want to tell people where to find you on social media, what projects they should follow, the handles to the initiative, to the Bitcoin transformation community, et cetera, et cetera? Yves, we can start with you.
I just want to say something before
Yeah.
we do that. I just want to, another meme is Bitcoin is the money of, or currency of enemies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people who I talk with about the Swiss National Bank, and, in general, Bitcoin price go up. They are upset because they're saying it goes against the pleb. But as we
Ah,
discussed and as you summed up, it is if your enemy can use it, it benefits you. And this is something that a lot of Bitcoiners don't really understand. It's not that it's for everybody. It's if your enemy uses it, then it your enemy has a line incentive with you, which means that he's going to protect your interests. And this is why I think it's important that the countries are involved at a stage where the pleb can still be independently custodying and owning and buying and exchanging and protecting these rights so that at the end of the day, the fact that the state uses it, like the whole podcast topic, right? Bitcoin reserve for countries and national banks will actually benefit plebs worldwide. And this is, to me, the most important part. If we go against states, states win. If we go in
yeah.
a way that the states has the same greed as Michael Saylor and Joe Pleb, then the state will be even richer. Michael Saylor will be even richer, but Joe Pleb can benefit from it and become more financially independent. And this to me is the key of the thing. So I just wanted to finish with that
Yeah.
to wrap up why I'm involved in that thing, because a lot of people are saying, well, you're a statist cock. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm a Bitcoiner and Bitcoin is my nation. And at the same time, Switzerland is my nation. I would like that those two can benefit me and
Mm-hmm.
other people who are the same as me on a global scale, not just in Switzerland, but everywhere else in the world. Anyway, my handle on Twitter is Lock, ZLOK, and the initiative handle is Initiative BTC, in one word altogether.
And there's a website as well, right?
And there is initiativebtc.ch
.ch. Perfect.
for
.ch for
Switzerland.
Switzerland. Yeah.
Exactly.
And CJ, what about you? Where can people find you?
Yes. Well, I'm gonna piggyback off Eve said because I
Of
agree.
course, of course.
Uh,
Yes.
Yes, please.
so like Louis Latimer, he created the cotton gin. He was a slave in America, and 67 years later, it led to the freedom of slaves. Why? Because the amount of cotton that was produced inflated the amount of supply, and so the South was the one that was getting all the cotton. The North is the ones that were selling it worldwide. Well, when you have a huge influx of supply, all of a sudden the prices had to go down because it wasn't as valuable, wasn't as rare anymore, and so the profit margins in the North got so low that they were like, "Hey, you have to release your slaves." So first they said you can't bring any more over here, and then when the profit margins got so low, they were like, "You have to release your slaves. You have to free them because you need to pay them so that you're not creating as much cotton because it's messing our money up." And so that one invention, it may have taken 67 years, but
Yeah.
because of the greed of the South, not listening to the North, saying, hey, lower the production, the greed, yes, it got a lot of slave owners wealthy, the ones who used the cotton gin, but their greed eventually led to our freedom. So I'm looking at it the same way here. where it's like, hey, I've got this little bit of Bitcoin, just a little bit. Me and all my communities got a little bit of Bitcoin, but because of the greed of the Michael Saylors and the Trumps and all of them, eventually that's going to lead to our financial freedom to where I can travel anywhere around the world, live where I want. And so that's the vision, the initiative of Bitcoin Transformation Community. We educate incarcerated people on Bitcoin and financial empowerment, and then we provide them jobs upon release in the Bitcoin mining space. Shout outs to our co-founders, Justin Reddick and Stacy Boyle. Shout outs to Block as well. They're the ones who have provided us a couple grants. Jack Dorsey, we'll be meeting with him out here in Kenya at the Bitcoin conference. And you can find me at CJ the Smart Guy across every major platform. No extra spaces, letters, numbers, lots of fake pages. And be on the lookout for my book, Bitcoin from a CPA perspective, from abacus to blockchain, as well as the Bitcoin Marathon in 2026 on Bitcoin's birthday, January 3rd, in Richmond, Virginia. So marathon continues.
Excellent. That's the first time I've heard a cotton gin to Bitcoin comparison, beautifully summarizing why greed can be beneficial and good. That is awesome. Very good. Thank you, Yves. Thank you, CJ. And hopefully another time we can have this conversation, perhaps when this passes in the US, we can come back and see how things have progressed.
Sounds good.
Fantastic.